Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are going to be learning the top 3 most simple yet effective chess traps for beginners. I hope you guys enjoy, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. So, this first deadly trap is called the Koan Defense trap. In this trap, you will learn how to checkmate your opponent in only 5 moves. So, it starts off with pawn to e4, and then your opponent plays pawn to c6, the Koan Defense. Then you respond with knight to c3, defending your e4 pawn. And your opponent responds with pushing his pawn to d5. And I know this may look like a weird move, but you're actually going to play queen to e2. Now your opponent's going to be a little confused here, but he's going to capture the pawn. And then you're going to capture back with your knight. Now, what your opponent could do is your opponent could play knight to f6. But if you capture the knight, that's a check, and this pawn right here is pinned to the king by your queen. So your opponent is forced to take the knight with this pawn, and that just doesn't really look too good. His pawn structure is destroyed, he's probably not going to play that. So, if your opponent's a beginner, he will probably play knights to d7. But that's a huge mistake, because then you play knight to d6. Smothered checkmate. GG. Now for the final demonstration. Smothered checkmate. And that is the Koan trap. This next devastating chess trap is called the fishing pole trap. In this trap, you will learn to checkmate your opponents in only 8 moves. So, it starts off with pawn to e4, and then you play pawn to e5. Your opponent plays knight to f3, attacking your pawn, and you respond with knight to c6. Then your opponent plays bishop to b5, to Roy Lopez, attacking your knight, and then you respond with knight to f6. Then your opponent responds with simply castling. Then you play knight to g4. The idea is, if your opponent attacks your knight with his pawn, you sacrifice your knight with pawn to h5. If your opponent's a beginner, he will probably take the knight with his pawn, without realizing that's a huge mistake. Because then you take back with your pawn, attacking your opponent's knights. If your opponent moves his knights to h2, you then play queen to h4. If your opponent takes this pawn with his knights, then you play queen to h1. Checkmate. If your opponent instead plays queen takes the pawn, that's still a huge mistake, because then you play queen takes on h2. Checkmate. Now, if your opponent plays rook to e1, thinking he can escape, he can't, because then you simply just take the knights, giving check. Your opponent moves his king, and then you play knight to d4, covering up his escape square. and checkmate is unstoppable in this position. Now for the final demonstration. Checkmate. And that is how you checkmate your opponent in only 8 moves with the fishing pole trap. This last trap is called the Blackburn Sherling trap. And in this trap, you will learn how to checkmate your opponent in only 7 moves. So, it starts off with pawn to e4, and then you play pawn to e5. Your opponent responds with knight to f3. And then you play knight to c6. Then your opponent plays bishop to c4, the Italian game. Then you play knight to d4, offering your opponent a free pawn. Your opponent accepts taking the pawn. And then you play queen to b5, forking your opponent's knight and this pawn. If your opponent takes the pawn on f7, forking your rook and your queen, that's a huge mistake. Because then you take the pawn on g2, attacking your opponent's rook. Your opponent then plays rook to f1, and then you capture the pawn on e4 with your queen, giving check. If your opponent blocks the check with his queen, then you simply just win a queen. If your opponent instead plays bishop to e2, you then play knight to f3. Smothered checkmate. GG. Now for the final demonstration. Smothered checkmate. And that is the Blackburn Sherling trap. And those are the top 3 most simple yet effective chess traps for beginners. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.